She raised him when his world was falling apart, then vanished without a goodbye. Decades later, Keanu Reeves receives a sealed letter with her name on it, and a secret she never had the chance to tell. What he discovers next will take him across continents and into a past he never knew he lost. Before we continue this incredible story, let us know where you're watching from. If you enjoy stories like this, subscribe to the channel, because tomorrow we have another inspiring story you won't want to miss. The house smelled exactly the same. Keanu couldn't explain why that mattered, only that it did. That warm mix of aged paper, wood polish, and the faintest trace of peppermint oil had clung to Mrs. Talbot's house since he was a boy. The same creaky steps, the same lace curtain by the window, the same glass candy jar still half full, though no one touched it anymore. He hadn't seen her in over 10 years, and yet she opened the door as if he'd only left yesterday. "You look thinner," she said, patting his arm, then adding, "But your eyes haven't changed." They settled into her sunlit parlor, where time felt still. A teacup rattled gently in its saucer as she set it on the side table. She wore her Sunday best, even though it was Thursday. Her silver hair was pinned back with the same clip she'd worn since he was 12. They talked for an hour, mostly her updates about neighbors and church friends, with Keanu chiming in softly. He didn't talk much about himself. He rarely did these days. Then, as she rose to refill the teapot, she paused. "I almost forgot," she said. "I found something a few months ago, in the bookcase. It's for you." She disappeared into the hallway and returned with a small brown box. Inside, wrapped in tissue paper, lay a single envelope, yellowed, sealed, handwritten in delicate looping script. "For Keanu, if he ever returns." Keanu froze. The handwriting, it was unmistakable. Lucia Alvarez. He said the name out loud so quietly it was barely more than breath. It didn't feel like a memory. It felt like a whisper from somewhere deeper, somewhere buried. "She left it here the day she moved," Mrs. Talbot said, sitting slowly beside him. "Got wedged behind a row of books. I only found it because I was dusting, of all things." Keanu turned the envelope over, hands gentle, as if it might crumble in his grip. The date on the back read March 3, 1981. He was 16 at the time, the year after Lucia left without a goodbye. "I didn't open it," Mrs. Talbot added. "Felt like it would be wrong." He nodded, lips pressed tight. His throat had started to close, and he didn't trust his voice. "Thank you," he managed. Mrs. Talbot said nothing else. She simply patted his knee and reached for another cookie. That evening, Keanu returned to his hotel downtown. The city hummed beneath the windows, streetcars, horns, laughter from pedestrians below, but he barely noticed. He set the envelope on the desk like an artifact. Lucia. He hadn't spoken her name in decades, but he hadn't forgotten. She had been the only source of calm in a house full of storms, the one who'd hummed lullabies in Spanish when his parents fought in the next room, the one who sat through long nights by his bed when fever wouldn't break, the woman who had vanished one day, just like that, and never returned. Until now. He turned on the lamp. Then slowly he opened the letter. The paper was thin, folded 3 times, and smelled faintly of lavender. As Keanu unfolded it, the first thing he noticed was the greeting. "Mi sol, my sunshine." He blinked, the words already hitting something tender. No one had called him that in years. Not since her. "Mi sol, if this letter finds you, it means you've come back, maybe not to this house or this room, but to a piece of yourself you may have forgotten. I hope the world has been kind to you, but more than that, I hope you have been kind to yourself." Keanu sat back, the paper trembling slightly in his hands. Her handwriting was soft, a little shaky in places, but elegant and full of care. It was her voice, clear as day. "You were a boy made of questions. I saw it in your eyes. Always thinking, always wondering why the people you loved didn't always know how to love you back. That wasn't your fault, Keanu. Never was. Your parents, they were broken in ways that had nothing to do with you. You didn't break them. You tried to fix them. And in that house, I saw a child doing the work of a man, just to survive. Keanu exhaled sharply, his jaw clenched. That truth, unspoken all these years, now sat on the page in front of him like an exposed nerve. He kept reading. I loved you like you were my own, but I never said it the way I should have. I thought I had more time. I thought I'd come back and tell you in person, but things don't always happen the way we plan, do they? Keanu leaned forward, elbows on his knees, the letter close to his chest. There is something I never told you, a truth I carried quietly to protect you. But now, maybe you're ready to hear it. Maybe the man you've become has the strength the boy never should have needed. If you want to understand, go to my hometown, San Rafael, Ontario. Speak to Rosa at the flower shop. She knows where I come from. She knows why I stayed with you as long as I did. There it was, a thread. A door cracked open. You were never just a job to me, Keanu. You were my reason to believe good could grow, even in hard soil. I never said goodbye, because I couldn't. But if you're reading this, it means you're still listening, and maybe now, it's time to dance with the past, one last time. The letter ended simply, with all the love I never got to say, Lucia. Keanu sat in stillness, the letter resting in his lap. For a long time, he didn't move, didn't blink, just sat there, listening to a voice only he could hear. Tomorrow, he thought, eyes closing. Tomorrow he would go to San Rafael. The next morning, Keanu Reeves stood at the window of his hotel room, watching the early light stretch across the Toronto skyline. His coffee sat untouched on the table beside him. The letter, still unfolded, lay neatly on the nightstand like a sacred artifact. Lucia Alvarez. Her name echoed through his thoughts like a steady drumbeat. He hadn't spoken it aloud since he was a boy, and yet last night he hadn't dreamed of anything else. He remembered the scent of cinnamon from her apron, the sound of her slippers down the hallway, the way her hand always rested gently on his shoulder whenever his parents fought behind closed doors. Lucia didn't speak often, but when she did, her words were poetry. Kindness disguised as ordinary conversation. And now, after all these years, she was reaching out from the past with something unfinished, a story, a secret, a piece of himself he never knew was missing. He packed lightly, just a change of clothes, his leather-bound journal, and the letter. Before he checked out, he wrote a short note to Mrs. Talbot and left it on the kitchen counter of her home. You didn't just give me a letter. You gave me back someone I lost. Thank you. By noon, he was in a rented car heading north, the city fading behind him. The air changed as the buildings grew smaller, the roads quieter. Snow flurries teased the windshield. Trees flanked the two-lane highway like gentle sentries. San Rafael. He hadn't heard the name since Lucia once pointed to a postcard and said, "That's where my sisters braid the sun into hair." He'd laughed, thought it was a joke. Maybe it wasn't. The GPS showed just under 3 hours. He didn't know what he was going to find there. He didn't know who Rosa was, but he knew one thing. Lucia mattered. And if there was more of her story still waiting in the quiet corners of that town, then he owed it to her, to the woman who helped him become the man he was, to listen. Really listen. As the highway opened to countryside and the sky began to turn silver, Keanu whispered to himself the words from the letter that wouldn't leave him. You were never just a job to me. And in the silence of that long drive, he let the weight of those words carry him forward. The first snowfall had dusted the fields by the time Keanu pulled off the rural highway into a small rest stop. He needed a moment, not for food, not even for coffee, just to breathe. He parked beneath a leafless maple, pulled the envelope from the inside pocket of his coat, and opened the letter again. It had only been a day, but already the paper felt worn at the creases. He smoothed it gently, like a relic. The words came alive once more. You used to wait at the window whenever your parents argued. You thought if you watched the street long enough, someone good might come walking up the sidewalk and make it all stop. I wanted to be that person, Keanu. I tried. He remembered that window, the way he'd press his fingers to the cold glass, his breath fogging the pane. He would count the cracks in the pavement below, each one like a step away from whatever pain hung in the house. Lucian had never said anything back then, not directly. She'd simply put a hand on his back and hummed softly. It was enough. Somehow, it had been enough. He read the next line slower. You gave me purpose I didn't know I needed. I was just a housekeeper when I arrived. Someone to help. But you... Me, Saul. You changed me. The day you gave me that necklace, made of cereal loops and yarn, I wore it under my clothes every day for months. Keanu's throat tightened. He had forgotten that moment until now. He must have been 5, maybe 6. The necklace had been part of a craft day at school. Everyone else made something for their moms or dads. He'd made his for Lucia. It had felt silly then, just loops and a broken shoelace. But now, reading her words, it meant more than he could explain. I never had children. I never had much of anything. But those afternoons with you, when we'd watch cartoons and you'd ask if clouds felt pain when they cried, I felt like the world gave me a miracle. He closed his eyes. These weren't just memories. They were pieces of him he hadn't known were missing. He felt them settle in the space between heartbeats, rebuilding a version of himself he hadn't visited in decades. I left something with my cousin Rosa in Stratford. I didn't want to disrupt your life, so I never mailed this. But if you found it, maybe it's time. Stratford. It wasn't far from here. An hour west, maybe less. Keanu folded the letter again and tucked it back into his coat. Stratford was waiting, and so was Rosa. The next morning, frost glittered on the windshield of Keanu's rental car like scattered glass. He scraped it slowly, mind elsewhere. The letter sat folded in the glove compartment, but it may as well have been pressed against his chest. Its weight hadn't left him since he opened it. He left Toronto just after sunrise, the roads quiet. As the city receded in the rearview mirror, his memories became louder. He remembered Lucia's voice, soft and steady, how she used to braid his hair before school, how she told him bedtime stories that blended Mexican folklore with Canadian winter landscapes, snow wolves who guarded the hearts of children, rivers that remembered your name if you whispered it into the wind. She had been magic to him, and now she was gone. He glanced at the GPS. Stratford was less than an hour away. He didn't know what he expected. A photograph? A keepsake? Maybe just a story from Rosa that would tie this all together. What he didn't expect was the ache, the quiet grief that came not from loss, but from rediscovery, finding someone again only through their absence. By the time he arrived, the streets of Stratford were calm and dignified, dressed in brick and quiet charm, a town that seemed to breathe in poetry. He parked on a side road near a row of older homes. Mrs. Talbot had given him a name and address. Rosa Mendoza, Lucia's cousin. Keanu stood in front of the modest white house for a moment, gathering himself. There were lace curtains in the window, a wreath on the door that looked handmade, and a potted plant barely clinging to life in the cold. He rang the bell. A minute passed. Then, a woman in her 70s opened the door. She had sharp cheekbones and dark, kind eyes, a knitted shawl wrapped around her shoulders. "Can I help you?" she asked with a soft accent, eyeing him carefully. Keanu hesitated, then smiled gently. "I think I'm here because of Lucia Alvarez." Rosa's hand rose to her mouth. He waited, letting her process. "You're Keanu?" she whispered. He nodded once. Rosa opened the door wider without another word and motioned him in. Inside, the house smelled like cinnamon and cedar. There were framed photos on every wall, generations of family he didn't know. But near the mantel, beside a tiny carved angel, was a picture he recognized. It was him, 7 years old, sitting in a plastic chair with serial loop necklaces draped over his neck like treasure. Lucia knelt beside him, smiling so wide her eyes disappeared into joy. Rosa followed his gaze. She kept that one by her bedside until the day she died. Keanu swallowed hard. She said you were her brightest chapter. Keanu sat with Rosa in her warm kitchen, a pot of chamomile tea steaming between them. Outside, the wind rustled bare branches, but inside, time seemed to fold inward, slowing into something sacred. She used to write letters she never mailed, Rosa said, her fingers wrapped around a hand-painted mug. Lucia was like that. She didn't want to be a burden, even with her feelings. Keanu nodded slowly, still feeling the words of that letter echo inside him. She said I saved her too, he murmured. I don't even know what she meant. Rosa smiled softly. Lucia had lost a child, years before she came to care for you. A little boy, just a toddler. Fever took him fast. She never talked about it with most people. But when she watched over you, it was like some part of her healed. Keanu felt the air leave his lungs. I had no idea. You wouldn't, Rosa said. That's how she wanted it. Her love for you wasn't something she wore on her sleeve, but it was in everything she did. Rosa stood and walked over to a cabinet. She opened a small wooden drawer and pulled out a bundle wrapped in faded cloth. She left this with me, told me to give it to you if you ever came, said you'd understand what it meant. Keanu carefully unwrapped the cloth. Inside was a small wooden carving, a figure of a child seated cross-legged, holding a sun-shaped medallion. The craftsmanship was delicate, weathered, but unmistakably handmade. I remember this, he whispered. She used to keep it on her nightstand. Rosa nodded. She carved it the night your parents told her they were separating, said you had cried yourself to sleep in her arms. That's when she knew she'd never let you feel alone again. Keanu didn't speak. He couldn't. The weight of the carving in his hands felt heavier than its size, like it held every quiet act of love Lucia had ever offered. Her meals, her lullabies, her long walks to the park when the world inside his house was falling apart. She wanted you to have this, Rosa said gently. And there's something else, too. In her journal, Rosa reached into a second drawer and handed him a leather-bound notebook. The first page held only one line, written in looping, patient script. He will forget the days, maybe even my face. But I pray he remembers how it felt to be safe. Keanu closed the book slowly. She made me feel like the world wasn't breaking, he said, voice low. And now, Rosa said with a warm but tearful smile, you get to carry that forward. Outside, snow had begun to fall. Inside, Keanu held the past in his hands, and something even stronger in his heart. The next morning, Keanu sat on the edge of his hotel bed, Lucia's letter folded gently in his lap. The city noise outside his window sounded distant, muffled by the weight of memory pressing in. He had spent most of the night rereading her words, turning each sentence over in his mind like a relic. You saved me too, she had written. And now the mention of someone named Rosa, Lucia's cousin in Stratford, had planted a seed that refused to sit still. Keanu made one quiet phone call to reschedule a script read-through in Los Angeles, then another to push back a press interview. He cleared 2 days. Not because he had to, but because something inside him whispered, don't let this pass you by. He picked up a modest rental car, a silver sedan with nothing flashy about it, and loaded nothing more than a duffel bag and Lucia's letter into the passenger seat. The GPS read 2 hours and 40 minutes to Stratford, a town he hadn't stepped foot in since a childhood field trip. As the car hummed onto the highway, Keanu turned the radio off. He didn't need noise. He needed to hear his own thoughts. The road unfolded slowly, bordered by autumn trees still clinging to their last bursts of color. He passed through quiet towns with names he half recognized from old Canadian maps. The longer he drove, the more distant the world of movie sets and flashing cameras became. What remained were memories, soft, fading images of Lucia wiping tears from his face after his father left, of her singing lullabies in a soft Spanish accent, of her whispering, "Eres fuerte, mi sol, you are strong, my sunshine." At a rest stop just outside of Stratford, Keanu parked under a large oak tree and pulled out the letter again. His fingers trembled slightly as he traced Lucia's looping handwriting. "If you've found this, my sweet boy, it means the world still holds pieces of me. I've left something with Rosa. I didn't want to disturb your life, but I prayed, if you ever looked back, this would be here waiting." He closed the letter gently, folded it back into its envelope, and whispered, "I'm looking, Lucia." 30 minutes later, Keanu pulled into Stratford, a sleepy town with streets lined by red brick homes and lampposts draped in hanging flower baskets. He drove slowly, watching the buildings pass like chapters from someone else's story. At the local records office, a kind woman named Greta helped him search the registry for Rosa Alvarez. After flipping through a thin binder and clicking through an old database, she looked up and smiled softly. "She still lives here," Greta said. "Out near Willow Bend Lane, small white house with a red mailbox. You'll know it when you see it." Keanu nodded his thanks and stepped back into the car, heart pounding just a little faster. He turned onto Willow Bend and slowed as he spotted a white house nestled between two weeping willow trees. The wind moved through the branches like fingers brushing through hair. A small red mailbox leaned slightly forward at the curb. He parked, stepped out, and took a deep breath. Then he walked slowly toward the porch. The wooden steps creaked under his boots as Keanu made his way up to the front porch. The house looked well kept, though humble. Lace curtains in the windows, a faded welcome mat, a wind chime shaped like tiny birds rustling above the door. He paused, unsure for a moment whether to knock. Then, gathering himself, he tapped gently. There was a moment of stillness. Then footsteps. The door opened with a soft click, revealing a petite woman in her 80s. Her hair, still streaked with black, was pulled back into a neat bun. She wore a wool cardigan and a long skirt. Her eyes, sharp and deeply lined, studied Keanu's face as if searching for something long lost. "Senor Reeves?" she asked in a voice full of caution and warmth. "Is it really you?" Keanu nodded. "Yes, ma'am. My name's Keanu Reeves. You must be Rosa Alvarez." She stepped back with one hand to her chest, her expression folding into astonishment and quiet emotion. "Lucia prayed you'd come one day," she said. "She wrote that letter so long ago, I never thought, well, I never knew if it would reach you." Keanu took a deep breath and held up the envelope. "It did. She left it with Mrs. Talbot in Toronto. I just read it last night." Rosa ushered him inside. The home smelled of old books, dried lavender, and coffee. It was filled with memories. Framed photos lined the hallway, family gatherings, church celebrations, birthdays. And in nearly every photo, Keanu noticed Lucia's face somewhere in the background, always smiling, always watchful. "Sheem used to talk about you like you were her own," Rosa said as she led him to a small sitting room with two mismatched armchairs and a quilted couch. "She loved you more than words could say. Said you were her light during a very dark time in her life." Keanu sat down slowly. "I never forgot her," he said, "but I didn't know. There was so much I didn't know." Rosa nodded solemnly. Then, after a moment's silence, she rose and disappeared into the back room. When she returned, she was carrying a small cedar chest about the size of a shoebox. It was old but beautifully crafted, with brass hinges and a faint floral carving on the lid. She held it out to Keanu. "Sheem asked me to keep this for you," Rosa said. "Told me to give it to you if you ever came looking." Keanu took the box with quiet reverence. He turned it over in his hands and noticed, almost hidden underneath, a small engraving, K.R., his initials, carefully etched in Lucia's handwriting. His throat tightened. She made that by hand, Rosa said. Every time she missed you, she worked on it a little more. Keanu ran his fingers along the initials, overcome with emotion. He hadn't expected to find something so tangible, so carefully preserved. It was like Lucia had left a piece of her heart inside the wood. "What's inside?" he asked softly. "I don't know," Rosa replied. "She said only you should open it." Keanu looked down at the chest, heart pounding. Keanu sat with the cedar chest resting gently on his knees. For a long moment, he didn't move. The room felt suspended in time, just the ticking of a mantel clock and the faint rustle of wind through the trees outside. With careful fingers, he unlatched the brass clasp. The lid creaked open. Inside, wrapped in delicate linen, were keepsakes so intimate they made his breath catch. A tiny photo of him as a toddler, sitting on Lucia's lap, both of them laughing. A necklace made of bright plastic beads and yarn, one he vaguely remembered stringing together as a child. And then, a faded Polaroid of him holding a wooden toy airplane, cheeks smeared with chocolate, Lucia beaming behind him with a towel over her shoulder. The image felt like a whisper from the past. Underneath it all, folded carefully in a separate envelope, was a second letter. Keanu pulled it free, his fingers trembling. It was addressed simply, "For when he is ready." He opened it slowly. Lucia's handwriting was still elegant, though slightly shakier than the first letter. She had written it years later, sometime in the early 90s. "My little sunshine. If you're reading this, then the world worked its quiet magic. I kept this chest so you'd never forget how much you were loved, even in the silence. When your family was breaking apart, you were the glue in the middle. You didn't know it, but you saved me. You gave my life purpose. You reminded me that small moments, laughing at the kitchen table, dancing to the radio, reading under blankets, those are the most sacred things we have. There is something I want you to know. When your mother and father separated, there were talks about sending you away for a while, boarding school or to live with distant relatives. Your mother was heartbroken, but I begged her to let me stay with you. I told her I'd work for free. I told her I couldn't bear to be away from you, and she agreed, not because I was a nanny, but because she knew I loved you like my own. You may not remember all the stories, but I do. I kept every laugh, every tear, every tiny hand hug, stored right here. You were never alone, Keanu, and you never will be. With all my love. Lucia." Keanu folded the letter back into the envelope with a shaking hand. His eyes stung. It wasn't loud grief, it was deeper than that. It was the ache of a child finally realizing he'd always been seen, always been loved. Even in the chaos of his youth, Lucia had been there. An anchor, a guardian, a mother in disguise. Rosa reached out and gently touched his arm. "She never stopped hoping you'd find this." Keanu wiped his eyes, then looked at the chest again. "She left me more than memories," he whispered. "She left me home." Outside, the sky had darkened into a soft lavender. The trees rustled like whispers, and Keanu Reeves, holding the last words of a woman who'd once saved his childhood, sat in stillness, cradled by time. The cedar chest was smaller than Keanu expected. Time had worn its edges smooth, and the clasp creaked when Rosa gently opened it. The scent of lavender and cedar wood rose into the room, a scent Keanu hadn't realized he remembered until it filled his lungs. Inside, everything was arranged with careful love. Hand-stitched baby clothes, neatly folded, sat in the top layer. Each piece was labeled with a tag: First Winter, Sunday Church, Learning to Walk. He picked one up, a tiny sweater with uneven stitching around the sleeves, and blinked away the emotion that swelled unexpectedly in his chest. "These were yours," Rosa said, watching his reaction closely. "Lucia made them when you were just a baby. She said you were the only one who ever smiled at her like she was somebody." Keanu swallowed hard, the sweater still in his hands. "I don't remember wearing them," he said softly. "You wouldn't," Rosa replied, "but she did." Underneath the clothes were folded pages of notebook paper, edges yellowed with age. his own childhood drawings. They were crude and colorful, stick figures, suns with faces, oddly shaped dogs. But every single one had, "For Lucia," scrawled in a child's messy handwriting. Then came the photo. It was a simple Polaroid, a bit faded but unmistakable. A young Lucia in her 30s sat barefoot in a small garden, holding toddler Keanu in her lap. He was laughing, grabbing at her long braid while she looked down at him with a smile that said everything she never put into words. Keanu stared at it, his thumb brushing over the surface. "I've never seen this before," he murmured. "She never showed it to anyone," Rosa said. "Said it was the best day she ever had." Keanu sat down on the edge of a chair, stunned into silence. This wasn't just a box of keepsakes. It was a box of memories he didn't know existed, a part of his life he had somehow lost, or perhaps never fully seen for what it was. Then Rosa reached into the chest one more time and pulled out an envelope, its paper fragile, its edges soft from decades of waiting. "This," she said carefully, "wasn't for you." Keanu looked at the handwriting. It wasn't his name on the front this time. It said, "Para Mateo." Rosa's voice softened. "Lucia had a son, Mateo, born before she came to Canada. She never told your family. She sent him to live with her sister in Veracruz when she took the job with you." Keanu blinked, stunned. "She had a child?" "She loved him deeply," Rosa said. "But she was poor. She thought working here would give him a better life. She sent money, letters. But she couldn't go back. Not for years." Keanu stared at the envelope. Unopened. Unsent. A weight settled into his chest like stone. Keanu turned the envelope in his hand. The handwriting was the same soft script as the letter he'd received, just a little shakier, like it had been written through tears or in secret. He didn't open it. He couldn't. It wasn't his to open. But he held it like something sacred. "She left this with me," Rosa explained. "She wanted Mateo to have it one day, if he ever came looking. But he never did. And she never tried to find him, not after she got sick. I think she felt she'd failed him." Keanu looked up, eyes full of disbelief. "She gave up her son to raise someone else's." "No," Rosa said gently. "She didn't give him up. She gave him everything she had, but she was human. And sometimes life makes you choose between one kind of love and another. She chose to help your family because she thought it would help him too. She thought you both deserved a better world." The words sank deep. Keanu set the letter down with reverence and ran his fingers through his hair. "She never said anything, never gave any hint." "She didn't want you to carry that burden," Rosa replied. "But it doesn't mean she didn't love you both. She did, fiercely." Outside, a light rain had begun to fall. The air smelled of damp earth and budding lilacs. Rosa walked over to a cabinet and returned with a worn, leather-bound photo album. "There's more," she said. She used to send photos back and forth with her sister. Mateo was maybe 10 the last time she saw a picture of him. She flipped to a page and showed Keanu a photo of a young boy standing by a river, dark eyes and solemn face. There was something in his posture, a quiet strength, maybe, that tugged at Keanu's memory, even though they'd never met. Rosa handed him the picture. "Lucia kept this under her pillow for years." Keanu didn't speak. He couldn't. The room felt like it was holding its breath, wrapped in the grief of missed chances and the beauty of silent sacrifice. He looked around at the chest, the drawings, the clothes, the photo, and now the letter, and for the first time in a long while he felt like a boy again. Small, grateful, loved. "She was the one steady thing in my life, when everything else was breaking," he whispered. Rosa nodded, wiping her eyes. "And you were the one steady joy in hers." Keanu stared at the unopened letter one more time, then quietly tucked it back into the chest. That night, he drove out to a nearby lake. The rain had stopped. He parked the car, rolled down the window, and listened to the water lapping against the shore. The photo of Lucia and toddler Keanu rested on the passenger seat, and beside it, the unopened letter to Mateo, still waiting, just like she had. Keanu stepped out of the car and sat on a bench facing the lake, the stillness wrapping around him like a heavy quilt. He pulled the photo from his jacket and stared at it under the dim glow of a nearby street lamp. In the image, Lucia's smile was wide, eyes squinting from the sun as she held him close in the garden of his childhood home. He couldn't have been more than 2 or 3. He'd never seen that side of her captured on camera, carefree, luminous, motherly. "I don't remember this day," he whispered, his voice catching in the air. "But I remember that feeling." For the next hour, Keanu stayed there, letting the memory of Lucia settle into his chest like roots growing into earth. He thought about all the small gestures she'd made, packing his school lunches, whispering lullabies when he was too afraid to sleep, the way her calloused hands would fix his shoelaces without a word when he rushed out the door. And now he knew that behind those moments was a sacrifice he'd never imagined. She had been more than a nanny. She had been a mother missing her own child, pouring that aching love into someone else's. Keanu's eyes drifted to the unopened envelope again. The weight of its contents felt heavier now, infused with decades of longing, grief, and love left unspoken. He couldn't read it, but he couldn't leave it behind either. He made a quiet decision then. The next morning, Keanu returned to Rosa's house and asked her permission to take the cedar chest. "Not to keep," he said, "but to deliver." "To Mateo?" she asked, surprised. "If I can find him." Rosa nodded slowly. She would have wanted that. Before leaving, Keanu kneeled beside the garden where Lucia used to sit. The early light brushed the soil in gold. He ran his hand over the earth, planted a small stone from the lake beside a sunflower, and whispered, "Thank you." Back at the car, he buckled the chest in the passenger seat, as if it were something fragile. In a way, it was. It held a woman's silent history, 2 lives unknowingly bound by her hands. And maybe, if he could find him, a reunion that would finally bring Lucia's story full circle. As he pulled onto the road, the photo of toddler Keanu and Lucia fluttered gently against the window. The wind caught it and pressed it to the glass, like it was pointing the way forward, toward closure, toward truth, toward the family she left behind, but never let go of. The morning after his emotional discovery by the lake, Keanu returned to Rosa's kitchen with the unopened letter in hand and a heaviness in his chest that hadn't left him since he first heard Mateo's name. Rosa was already up, sipping herbal tea at the table, sunlight catching in her white curls. The house smelled of cinnamon and old stories. "I need to know everything," Keanu said gently, placing the letter between them. Rosa set her cup down and folded her hands over the edge of the table, nodding slowly. "She never wanted you to feel burdened by her pain," she began. "Lucia believed her job was to protect you from the world, not to draw you into hers." Keanu remained silent, listening with his full heart. Rosa explained that Lucia's life before Canada had been full of hardship. Her husband, Emilio, a gentleman who had worked with his hands, died in a work accident when Mateo was just a toddler. With no pension, no savings, and barely any education, Lucia was left scrambling. She worked odd jobs, sold homemade food on street corners, and even cleaned houses late into the night, all while raising Mateo alone. "But when she was offered the job with your family, it felt like a miracle," Rosa said. "The pay was consistent, the people were kind, there was a future. But the job required her to move to Toronto, and she couldn't bring Mateo." Rosa took him in, Lucia's older cousin, already raising 2 boys of her own. "He was shy at first," she recalled, "but he was a good boy. And Lucia, she wrote him every week, sent little toys, prayed he wouldn't forget her." Keanu's hand curled around his mug. His mind swirled with images of the woman who had sung him lullabies while her own child was sleeping in another country, missing her voice. Why didn't she go back? "She was going to," Rosa said, voice trembling. "She saved everything she could, but life in Toronto pulled at her. She became attached. To the job? To the child she cared for? To you? That part of the story stung the most. Keanu had known he was cared for, but now he realized what it had cost her. "She used to hum while folding your laundry," Rosa whispered. Not because she was happy, but because it reminded her of folding Mateo's little shirts. Tears welled in Keanu's eyes. So much of the peace he remembered from his chaotic childhood had come from this woman who had poured herself out every day while quietly holding her grief. He picked up the unopened letter addressed to Mateo, still sealed, edges yellowed. "Did she ever send this?" Rosa shook her head. "She always said, 'One day, when he's ready.'" Keanu sat quietly for a long time, the letter resting between his fingers. The house had gone still again, filled only with the low hum of the refrigerator and the occasional creak of old floorboards. Rosa, sensing his need for space, had stepped into the garden. He stared at the envelope, his thumb grazing the name written in Lucia's steady, maternal hand, Mateo Alvarez. Even the way she wrote her son's name was tender. Keanu's mind flashed back to nights in his childhood when his parents were fighting in the next room. He remembered Lucia sitting beside his bed, gently rubbing his back in silence, as if her presence alone could guard him from the chaos. She'd given him that kind of comfort night after night, while her own son was hundreds of miles away, needing the same. The injustice of it overwhelmed him. He rose from the table, walked into the living room, and lowered himself onto the couch, resting the letter on his lap. From a side table, he picked up an old framed photograph of Rosa and Lucia as teenagers, standing arm in arm beneath a mango tree. He studied Lucia's face, youthful, strong-jawed, full of hope. That face had aged into the one he remembered, the one that smiled even when her eyes looked tired. When Rosa came back in, wiping her hands on a tea towel, Keanu turned to her. "Do you have a photo of Mateo?" he asked softly. She nodded. From a drawer beneath the television, she retrieved a dusty photo album and flipped through the pages until she stopped at a picture of a boy, maybe 10 years old, wearing a paper crown, a bit of frosting on his cheek. His smile was bright. His eyes were unmistakably Lucia's. Keanu touched the corner of the photo. "He looks happy." Elle was. Some years were hard, but he was always loved. Did he ever ask why she left? Rosa hesitated. "When he was older, yes. I told him the truth, but gently, that she made an impossible choice, one that no mother should ever have to make." He cried, then he stopped asking. And when he turned 18, he moved to Vancouver, said he wanted to start over, somewhere new. "Do you know where he is now?" Keanu asked, already knowing his heart wouldn't rest until he found him. "I still get the occasional Christmas card," Rosa said with a small smile. "He's a school teacher, art and English, works with kids from rough backgrounds." Keanu closed his eyes. Of course he did. Lucia's love, her sacrifice, had lived on through Mateo. The same nurturing energy that had soothed Keanu's childhood had shaped her own son, even from afar. It was time. Keanu opened his eyes. "I want to meet him. I need to." Rosa nodded slowly. "Then you will. And I think it's what Lucia would have wanted most." Keanu stood at the edge of Lake Ontario, the sun barely cresting over the horizon, the second letter resting in his hand like a sacred relic. The signature, Lucia's, was still visible, though time had begun to fade the ink. The name on the envelope read Mateo Alvarez, and it carried more weight than he knew how to hold. Mateo, her son, the one Lucia never mentioned, the one she left behind to care for him. He returned to his Toronto hotel with a quiet purpose pulsing through him. That night, he didn't sleep. Instead, he opened his laptop and made a call to Marin, a researcher he had trusted for years, someone who worked with him quietly, discreetly, and respectfully. Her specialty wasn't celebrity publicity or business. It was people, missing people. "I need your help," he said simply, sending her a photograph of the envelope. "His name is Mateo Alvarez. He'd be in his 60s now, last known connection is to a woman named Lucia from Mexico. He was likely raised there while she worked in Canada as a nanny. Marin didn't ask many questions. She knew Keanu well enough to know when something mattered. "Give me a week," she said. It didn't take a week. Within 3 days, Marin had narrowed the possibilities down to 2. One man had passed away 10 years prior, but the other, Alvarez, was living quietly near Guadalajara. A retired carpenter, divorced, no children, little online presence, but Marin confirmed it through a municipal registry photo. His eyes resembled Lucia's in a way that made Keanu's breath hitch. He felt it in his chest. This was him. But what did he say? How did one introduce themselves as the adult child of the woman who had left your mother behind? Keanu sat for hours, writing and rewriting a letter. He didn't want to overstep. He didn't want to assume anything. He only wanted to honor what Lucia had done. For both of them. The final draft read simply, "Dear Mr. Alvarez, I hope this letter finds you in good health. My name is Keanu Reeves. I believe we may have been connected by someone very dear to us both. Your mother, Lucia Alvarez, was my nanny during my childhood years in Toronto. She cared for me with great love and tenderness at a time when my family life was turbulent. I recently came across a letter she had written but never sent, and in that letter, your name was mentioned. She never forgot you. I believe she never stopped loving you. If you're open to it, I would be honored to meet you and share the pieces of her life that shaped mine. With respect and sincerity, Keanu." He mailed the letter himself, hands trembling as he dropped it into the postbox. Then he waited. 3 weeks passed. Keanu didn't press. He didn't follow up. Some answers, he understood, couldn't be rushed. If Mateo chose not to reply, he would respect that. Some people built their lives on silence, not because they didn't care, but because speaking might hurt more than keeping quiet. Then, one evening, just as Keanu was stepping out of a late screening in LA, his assistant handed him an envelope. It had been forwarded to his office, no return address, but the handwriting was careful, neat. Inside was a single sheet of paper. "Mr. Reeves, I received your letter. I do not remember my mother very well. She left when I was very young. I've tried not to think of that part of my life for a long time. But your letter was gentle, and something in your words rang true. Come if you'd like. I don't know what you're hoping to find, but I would like to know who she became to you. Respectfully, Mateo Alvarez." Keanu folded the letter with a reverence that caught him off guard. He sat with it for a long time, just turning it over in his hands. He thought about Lucia, how she must have wondered if her son would ever hear her story. And now, maybe he would. The very next day, Keanu rearranged his schedule. He cleared 10 days from filming prep and told his agent, "I need some time. It's personal." No press, no entourage, no publicist, just him and a worn leather duffel. He booked a modest flight into Guadalajara and arranged for a quiet rental home on the outskirts of town. He didn't want to arrive in a rush. He wanted space to breathe. The drive from the airport was quiet. Sunlight poured across the hills like gold spilled across stone. As he approached the neighborhood Marin had described, he passed hand-painted signs, small churches, boys playing football barefoot in the dust. The address led to a pale blue stucco home with a red-tiled roof and 2 chairs on a shaded porch. It was simple, still, and alive in the way quiet places sometimes are. Keanu didn't walk up right away. He parked a few houses down, sat, breathed, thought of Lucia's lullabies, thought of the second letter still sealed in his bag. Then he stepped out and walked to the porch. Before he could knock, the door opened. A man, mid-60s, silver-streaked hair, leathered skin from decades in the sun, stood silently. Their eyes met. "Mr. Alvarez?" Keanu asked gently. The man gave a soft nod. "Keanu Reeves," he said, voice rough but calm. Keanu nodded. "I brought something that belongs to you." Mateo led Keanu to a small bench just beside the door, under the soft rustle of a bougainvillea vine that curled up the stucco wall. He didn't say much, just motioned for him to sit. Keanu did, placing the cedar chest on his lap. He hesitated for a breath, then gently opened the lid. Inside, wrapped in a cloth, was Lucia's second letter, unopened since Rosa placed it there decades ago. "I believe she wrote this for you," Keanu said quietly, handing it over. Mateo looked at it for a long time before taking it in his calloused hands. The weight of the moment was thicker than any words. "I never knew her," he finally whispered. "Not really. I only had a few memories. Her hands, maybe. A song." Keanu nodded slowly. "She used to sing you lullabies in Spanish. She sang them to me too." Mateo looked up, eyes misted. "Did she ever talk about me?" "All the time," Keanu said. "But she never said your name, only that she missed something that couldn't be replaced." The silence that followed wasn't empty. It held everything both men didn't know how to say. Mateo held the letter to his chest, but didn't open it. Not yet. Instead, he asked, "What was she like?" "As a nanny," Keanu smiled gently. "She was warmth when the world felt cold. She was laughter in the hallway when the house was filled with silence. She made me feel safe." Mateo's lips pressed together, his throat working. "Then, I'm glad," he said hoarsely. "Glad she meant something, that she gave love somewhere, even if I didn't get it." Keanu looked at him, feeling the familiar ache of loss, but also the strange shape of healing. "She didn't stop loving you, Mateo. I think she just didn't know how to come back." Mateo nodded, wiping his eye with the back of his hand. "Maybe this letter will help." He looked down at it again, but didn't open it. Instead, he asked, "Will you stay a little while?" Keanu smiled. "I'd be honored." That afternoon, they sat in the backyard under a lemon tree. Mateo made strong coffee. Keanu shared stories of Lucia's quiet humming, her strange habit of folding towels with perfect corners, how she once patched his favorite sweater by hand after he tore it. For the first time in years, two strangers bound by one woman began to know each other, not through blood, not through obligation, but through the legacy of a heart that gave beyond itself. By dusk, Keanu stood to leave. Mateo shook his hand, then paused. "If you ever want to come back," he said softly, "you're welcome." Keanu nodded. "And when you're ready," he said, motioning to the letter, "I hope it brings you peace." He turned and walked down the quiet street. Behind him, on the porch, Mateo finally broke the seal. The sun was soft over the terracotta rooftops when Keanu stepped into the quiet courtyard of the guest house in Guadalajara. A few birds fluttered in the fig tree above, casting moving shadows on the ground. He wore no sunglasses, no hat, just a plain shirt, jeans, and a worn leather bag slung over one shoulder. In that moment, he wasn't a celebrity. He was just a man carrying someone else's memory across time. Mateo Alvarez sat on a stone bench in the corner, back straight, hands folded over his knee. He looked to be in his early 70s. Weathered skin, silver hair pulled back into a modest ponytail. His hands were the first thing Keanu noticed. Scarred, strong, with dirt beneath the nails. The hands of someone who had built his life from the ground up. They exchanged a small nod. Then Keanu walked forward, slowly, like stepping into something sacred. "Mr. Alvarez?" he asked, voice low. Mateo stood. "You must be Keanu." They shook hands. Mateo's grip was firm, but not forceful. Keanu could feel a subtle tremor in it, whether from age or emotion, he couldn't tell. "Thank you for writing back," Keanu said. Mateo nodded. "To be honest, I almost didn't. But something about your letter felt like her." Keanu reached into his bag and pulled out a small photo he'd brought, a copy of the one he'd found in the cedar chest of Lucia holding toddler Keanu in the garden. He offered it silently. Mateo took it with both hands. "She looks younger than I remember," he murmured. "I haven't seen a picture of her since I was maybe 10? They sat beneath the fig tree, letting the sounds of distant street vendors and passing motorcycles drift over them. Keanu didn't rush into the letter. He started with stories. Small ones. She used to hum when she made bread, Keanu said. Always the same tune, over and over. I never knew the name, but it sounded like home. Mateo looked at him. She used to hum to me too, when I had bad dreams. Keanu smiled faintly. Then it was her lullaby. They talked for hours, Keanu describing Lucia's soft laughter, her strict bedtime rules, the way she folded his clothes so precisely it felt like an art. Mateo sat silently through much of it, but his eyes told the truth. They shimmered, swelled, and sometimes clenched shut for a breath too long. When the sun dipped lower and the wind picked up just slightly, Keanu reached into his bag once more. This time, he pulled out the second letter, still sealed. He handed it to Mateo with care, as if it might crumble in the wrong hands. She wrote this for you, Keanu said. She didn't get to send it, but I think she wanted you to have it. Mateo didn't speak. He just looked at the envelope like it was made of fire. Mateo held the letter without opening it for a long time. His thumb brushed across Lucia's handwriting, the soft curve of the L in his name. His jaw tightened. He blinked rapidly but said nothing. Then, with a slow breath, he broke the seal. Keanu looked away, giving him privacy. The courtyard was quiet now. Even the birds seemed to sense the gravity of the moment. Only the faint rustle of fig leaves filled the space between them. As Mateo read, his lips parted slightly, his eyes scanning each word with the kind of hunger only time could create. Halfway through, his shoulders trembled. By the end, he was no longer holding back tears. Keanu still didn't speak. He sat with his elbows on his knees, hands folded. He knew this grief. Not loud or messy, but deep, still, and heavy, like a stone at the bottom of a river. Mateo lowered the letter slowly onto his lap and looked at Keanu. She remembered everything, he whispered. My favorite shirt, the way I used to line up my toys. She wrote that she sang to the moon on my birthday. Keanu gave a soft nod, throat thick. She loved you. Mateo's voice broke. I thought she left because she didn't. A long silence stretched between them. Then Keanu said, she left because she didn't have another choice. But I think she never really left you. Mateo stared down at his hands. I grew up angry. I blamed her for everything. My aunt tried to explain, but I didn't want to hear it. I thought she picked someone else over me. Keanu's gaze dropped. She picked both of us in her heart, but life didn't let her have both. Mateo glanced back at the letter. She said she watched every movie you were in, that she would whisper, "That's my boy too," whenever she saw your face on the screen. Keanu's eyes filled. He swallowed hard and looked up at the sky, blinking fast. She used to say that when I made her laugh, he said. I hadn't heard that in years. Mateo folded the letter carefully and tucked it into his jacket pocket. Then he reached out, not hesitantly, and clasped Keanu's hand with surprising strength. Thank you, he said. Not just for this, for remembering her, for giving me back something I thought I lost forever. Keanu's voice was hoarse. I didn't expect to find you, but I'm glad I did. The two men sat in silence, hands still clasped, two lives separated by decades, stitched together by a woman who had loved them both in different ways, across different continents and under different names. The light filtering through the trees painted dappled shadows on the courtyard wall. It felt holy, quiet, full. Mateo finally leaned back, exhaling as if he'd released something he didn't know he was carrying. You know, he said, I spent my life working with wood. I could take raw cedar, cracked driftwood, even splintered pine, and shape it into something solid. Something worth keeping. Keanu tilted his head slightly, listening. But I never thought my story could be made whole again, Mateo continued. I thought it ended when she left. Turns out, it was just a chapter. Keanu nodded. Sometimes, It takes someone else to bring the rest of the pages. Later, they shared a modest meal under the orange sky. No press, no cameras, just two men at a small table, passing stories and memory between them like bread. Mateo showed Keanu a carving he'd been working on, a delicate relief of a tree, roots spreading wide into the base. "Started it years ago. Didn't know why. I do now." Keanu ran his fingers gently along the grooves. "She would have loved this." They exchanged contact information. Mateo didn't ask for favors, and Keanu didn't offer any. This wasn't charity, it wasn't guilt. It was restoration, the kind that doesn't come with headlines, only peace. As Keanu stood to leave, Mateo placed a small wooden bird in his hand. "I carved this when I was 16, he said. "It was supposed to be a gift for her. I never got the chance." Keanu held it like it was made of glass. "I'll keep it safe." On the drive back to the hotel, Keanu didn't play music. He let the quiet sit with him like an old friend. He replayed Mateo's words, Lucia's letter, and the weight of what they had both lost and found. That night, before going to sleep, he placed the wooden bird on the nightstand beside Lucia's original letter. Then he whispered, "You gave us both a home, Lucia, even when you couldn't be there." And for the first time in a long while, he slept deeply, with no dreams, just warmth. The morning sun in Guadalajara was different than Keanu remembered. It didn't pierce the air, it warmed it gently, like a hand on the shoulder. As he stepped out of the small guest room Mateo had arranged for him at a nearby inn, he carried the old photograph Lucia had once tucked away in the cedar chest. The one of her holding him as a toddler in the backyard, sunlight painting her face. Mateo was already up, watering a row of potted marigolds. His hands moved slowly, but with the care of a man who respected quiet things. Wooden benches curved around a small central path lined with cactus and hand-carved birds perched on tree stumps. Every inch of the garden bore the signature of someone who worked not for applause, but for peace. Keanu approached quietly. "Sheen used to hum when she gardened," he said, voice low. Mateo didn't look up right away, but he nodded. "I don't remember the sound, just that it felt safe when she held me." Keanu took a slow breath. She made people feel that way, like the world couldn't hurt you while she was near. They walked together without speaking. Each step over gravel and stone felt like a step deeper into Lucia's memory. Mateo paused to brush dust from a sculpture of a small deer, no taller than a child's knee. "Did she ever talk about me?" he asked, eyes still on the deer. "All the time," Keanu replied. "Just not to me. Not when I was a kid, but in her letter, she said you were the best part of her." Mateo stood there for a long time. "I used to think she left me," he finally said, "abandoned me for another family. But reading that letter, hearing what you told me, I think I misunderstood." Keanu handed him the photo. Mateo took it with trembling fingers. His eyes scanned every inch. Lucia's soft eyes, the light in her smile, the way toddler Keanu clung to her shirt like she was his whole world. "She looked happy," Mateo whispered. "She was," Keanu replied. "Because of you. And maybe because of me too." They sat beneath an old jacaranda tree in the back corner of the garden. Purple blossoms had just started to fall, dotting the earth like confetti from a celebration no one remembered to announce. Mateo rested the photo in his lap. Keanu looked around the yard again. It wasn't just a garden, it was a story carved into living things. Lucia's hands had shaped Keanu's heart. Mateo's had shaped the earth. And here they were, two pieces of her legacy, finally sitting side by side. For a while, the only sound between them was the hush of wind moving through the jacaranda tree. Mateo leaned back against the bench and looked toward the distant hills. His expression was unreadable, but not cold, just quiet, like someone learning a language he hadn't spoken in years. "You know," he said. I used to resent every child I saw in photos with her. Smiling, happy, held. Keanu turned toward him, listening. I thought, how could she be that warm to strangers and leave her own son behind? Mateo continued, his voice steady. But now I think, maybe she wasn't leaving me. Maybe she was becoming something bigger, something that helped more than one person at a time. Keanu nodded, moved by the quiet wisdom in Mateo's words. She carried more than grief. She carried hope. She passed it to both of us, just in different ways. Mateo gave a half smile. And now, you're carrying it back. Keanu looked down at his hands, strong hands that had held guns, on screen, held fans at red carpets, and once held Lucia's weathered palm as a child. It feels like this is part of why I'm here, not just in Mexico. I mean, here, in this world. Mateo's gaze softened. Do you believe in that? Fate? I don't know, Keanu said honestly, but I believe in people. I believe in what stays inside you even after someone's gone. The wind picked up slightly, stirring the petals around their feet. I've been alone for a long time, Mateo said. Not because I had to be, I just didn't know how to be with people. Until now. Keanu reached into his coat pocket and pulled out something small. A woven bracelet, barely held together after decades. I made this for her once, out of string and cereal. Mateo took it carefully, chuckling through his tears. You were one of those kids. He kept it in a little cedar box all those years. Mateo stared at it, then back at the photo in his lap. She didn't forget me. No, Keanu said. She couldn't. They sat like that until the sun began to shift. Golden light swept across the bench, warming the photo in Mateo's hands. It was as if Lucia herself had joined them there, unseen but felt, sitting between them. Mateo took a deep breath and said, Would you mind staying for dinner? I make a good sopa de ajo, learned from my aunt, Lucia's sister. Keanu smiled gently. I'd be honored. Inside Mateo's home, the kitchen smelled of garlic and paprika. Simple ingredients, timeless comfort. Keanu sat at the small wooden table while Mateo moved around the stove with a rhythm that felt inherited. Motions passed down from women who once stirred pots in quiet kitchens while humming lullabies. On the wall above the sink hung a single photo. Lucia in her 20s, dark braids tucked behind her ears, a soft smile on her face. Mateo hadn't mentioned it. He didn't need to. Her presence was everywhere. While the soup simmered, Keanu noticed a box of carved birds by the windowsill. You make these? He asked. Mateo nodded. Every winter. It's something to do with the hands, calms the thoughts. Keanu picked one up. It was small, delicate, its wings curved as if caught mid-slight. They remind me of her lullabies, gentle but full of flight. They ate quietly, the warmth of the sopa grounding them both. Mateo ladled seconds without asking, and Keanu accepted without speaking. It was a different kind of conversation, one built on shared loss, quiet presence, and something neither of them could define, but both recognized. As the sky outside darkened to indigo, Mateo stood up and walked to a cabinet. He returned with a small, wrapped package and handed it to Keanu. She left this for you too, told Rosa it wasn't ready until you were. Keanu unwrapped the soft cloth carefully. Inside was a journal, Lucia's. The pages were filled with dated entries, most in Spanish, some in broken English. The first page simply read, For my two boys, one born to me, one born to my heart. Keanu's hands trembled. He looked up at Mateo, whose eyes were shining again. I didn't know she kept a journal, Mateo said. Keanu pressed the book to his chest. I didn't know she called me her boy. They sat outside afterward, the stars blooming overhead. She would have liked this, Mateo said, gesturing at the quiet night. Us. Talking. Keanu smiled faintly. She always said silence was her favorite language. They both chuckled softly. When it was time to leave, Keanu stood and offered his hand again. Mateo didn't shake it this time. He embraced him. Rough hands around shoulders, an exhale that sounded like years lifting off his chest. "Thank you," Mateo whispered. Keanu pulled back just enough to say, "She would have been proud of you." Mateo replied, "She already was." They let go, but neither felt like anything was ending. In fact, something had just begun. The morning sun peeked through the narrow alleys of the village as Keanu and Mateo made their way down a winding cobblestone path. The air smelled faintly of tortillas and wood smoke, familiar and calming. Neither of them spoke much. Their bond, though new, was already rooted in something deeper than time, an invisible thread, woven through a woman who gave them both pieces of herself. They reached the chapel by mid-morning. It was a small stone building, worn by years of prayer and rain. Ivy climbed the bell tower, and the wooden cross above the entrance leaned just slightly, as if bowing. Inside, it was silent, except for the occasional creak of floorboards. Mateo stepped through the door first, then paused. "She used to sit right there," he said, pointing to a narrow wooden bench near the side altar. "Father Emilio said she would come before work, after work, even on her days off. Said she used to write letters for people who couldn't read or write. Old men, widows, migrant workers." Keanu walked over and sat gently on the bench. The wood sighed beneath his weight. He ran his fingers along the worn grain, imagining Lucia seated here, her head bowed, pen in hand. He could almost hear the scratch of ink against paper, the whisper of devotion. Mateo knelt at the front pew, his hands folded in a way that seemed instinctual. After a few quiet moments, he looked up. "I was angry at her for a long time," he admitted, voice low and steady. "I used to imagine her forgetting me, building a new life without a second thought." Keanu turned, listening closely. "I didn't know she was here," Mateo continued. "Didn't know about the letters, about you. All I knew was that she left, and in the silence, I filled in the worst possible story." Keanu nodded slowly. "I did the same with my father. Different reasons, same silence." The chapel held their words like a vessel, sacred and undisturbed. Mateo pulled something from his coat pocket. It was a folded piece of paper, aged and yellowed at the edges. "Father Emilio gave me this, said he found it years ago in a stack of old correspondence. It's one of hers." Keanu leaned closer as Mateo opened the letter. It wasn't addressed to anyone specific. The handwriting was unmistakably Lucia's, gentle, flowing, deliberate. Some people are called to hold what others drop, not because they're stronger, but because they can carry it quietly. "I have loved two sons, one by blood, one by bond. I do not know if they will ever meet, but if they do, I hope they remember that love isn't divided, it's doubled." Mateo stared at the words, tears filling his eyes. Keanu felt his throat tighten. He hadn't expected to find her voice again, not like this. "She loved us both," Mateo whispered. Keanu nodded. "In ways we never knew. Until now." They lit a candle for her in the chapel, placing it near a stained glass window where sunlight poured in like quiet forgiveness. Mateo knelt beside it, whispering something too soft for Keanu to hear. Keanu didn't intrude. He stepped back, giving the moment its space. When Mateo stood again, his face had changed, not entirely, but something had softened. As they walked out into the courtyard, the brightness of the day hit them both. Life was moving outside. A boy chased a ball along the street. A woman hung sheets on a line, humming under her breath. "She worked all day," Mateo said, "but at night she would write me. Letters I never got. Rosa told me later they got lost when she moved." Keanu listened, arms folded, the photograph of Lucia and little Keanu still tucked safely in his coat. "She never talked about you," Mateo added, "but she kept one photo of you. Rosa said she looked at it before bed." Keanu's eyes fell. "She kept one of me. I found it in a chest. She called me my little sunshine." Mateo smiled faintly. That sounds like her. They found a shaded bench beside a citrus tree, the leaves rustling above like whispers. Mateo began carving something into the bench with a pocket knife. His hands were steady, familiar with the motion. I've made things all my life, he said, but I've never made peace with the past. Not until now. Keanu said nothing, but he understood. They spoke about Lucia's laughter, how rare it was but unforgettable, about the stew she used to make with bay leaves and garlic, about the lullaby she'd hum that wasn't really a song, just soft syllables and love. Mateo shared how he'd grown up with resentment tucked under his ribs like a stone, how he built furniture with calloused hands and never let himself grieve. I thought grief was for those who had someone to lose. I didn't think she was mine anymore. Keanu leaned forward. You were hers. You always were. She never stopped being your mother. Mateo's eyes glistened, and he let the silence stretch between them, letting it breathe. I didn't know how much I needed to hear that. A bell rang from the chapel behind them. Noon. The moment felt sacred, not in its formality, but in its humanity. Two men, brought together by someone who never saw them in the same room, now sitting side by side under a Mexican sky, carving memory into wood and truth into silence. Lucia's presence was everywhere and nowhere, in the citrus scent, in the shadows, in the heartbeat of the moment. She hadn't said it all in her letters, but what she didn't say, they were now discovering together. That evening, Keanu stayed for dinner at Mateo's home, a modest stucco house with creaking doors and mismatched chairs. The kitchen smelled like cumin and roasted tomatoes, and Mateo cooked without instruction, without recipes, just memory guiding his hands. They ate at a small table beneath a single hanging bulb. No fancy wines, no cinematic moments, just two plates, two men, and the faint sound of a radio humming from the next room. Between bites, Mateo asked, "Do you think she forgave me?" Keanu looked up. There was nothing to forgive. Mateo sat with that thought for a while, chewing slowly. Then he reached across the table and handed Keanu something. A tiny, hand-carved bird made from mesquite wood. I used to make these as a kid, Mateo said. She liked birds. Keanu turned the carving in his hand. It was smooth, simple, beautiful. She said birds are always returning to the sky, Mateo added, voice soft. Maybe she's there now. Keanu smiled, watching both of us, finally together. They stepped outside after dinner. The stars had begun to appear. Mateo looked up, then turned to Keanu. I don't remember her laugh clearly, he confessed. But tonight, I think I heard it again. Keanu reached into his jacket and pulled out the photograph once more. He handed it to Mateo. Keep it, Keanu said. You should see her smile every day. Mateo took it like it was a treasure, and to him it was. Before parting ways, they returned to the bench under the citrus tree. Mateo pointed to the carving he'd made earlier, just two initials, side by side. L.A. plus M.A. Lucia Alvarez, Mateo Alvarez. Keanu added one more mark with the edge of his ring. Plus K.R. Not claiming her, just belonging to her. She gave us both a kind of home, Keanu said. Different, but real. Mateo nodded, and now we've brought her home. They stood there a moment longer, the scent of orange blossoms in the air, the moon just starting to rise. In the quiet, in the peace, there was nothing more to say. Lucia's story, the one she never got to tell, had finally been heard. And for the first time in decades, both her sons, by blood and by bond, were no longer strangers to each other, or to her. Truth. The wheels of the rental car hummed against the quiet back roads of Stratford as Keanu pulled onto the narrow lane that led to Rose's cottage. He hadn't planned to return so soon, but something about the letter Mateo gave him, something about the way it connected lives across borders and decades, urged him to come back. Not with answers, necessarily, but with something that felt like closure. Or maybe continuation. The envelope rested on the passenger seat, plain and unmarked except for one word written in Mateo's looping, deliberate hand. Gracias. It wasn't addressed to Rosa by name, but Keanu knew she would understand immediately who it was from and why it mattered. He pulled up to the little house tucked between the willow trees. The branches swayed gently in the breeze, and the chimes on the porch sang a low, familiar tune. Rosa was out front, kneeling in her garden with a pair of clippers in one hand and a sun hat shielding her face. She looked up as the car door shut, blinking against the light, and her hand went still when she recognized him. "You came back," she said softly, her voice touched with surprise and warmth. Keanu smiled. "I had to." He approached slowly, reverently, like stepping onto sacred ground. Rosa stood to meet him, brushing her hands on her apron. "I brought something," Keanu said, reaching into his coat pocket and pulling out the envelope. He held it out with both hands. Rosa took it carefully, as if it might crumble in her fingers. She read the word on the front, then looked up at him with eyes full of wonder and disbelief. "Mateo," she breathed. The word fell from her lips like a prayer. She clutched the envelope to her chest and turned toward the house. "Come in," she said. "Please, I think I need to sit down." Inside, the home smelled like warm bread and lavender. The same crocheted pillows lined the floral couch, and the lace curtains danced in the breeze. Rosa moved slowly but deliberately, leading him to the kitchen table where a fresh vase of daffodils stood in the center. She placed the letter beside the vase and lowered herself into the chair with a long, thoughtful sigh. "I never thought I'd hear that name again," she murmured. Keanu sat across from her, his hands folded quietly. "Mateo wanted you to have it. He asked me to deliver it myself." Rosa's eyes filled. "Lucia always said things find their way home. I never believed her. Until now." Rosa ran her fingertips over the envelope again before carefully sliding her finger beneath the flap. She opened it with a tenderness usually reserved for prayer. The paper inside was thick, textured, like something chosen with purpose. Her hands trembled slightly as she unfolded it. Keanu looked away, giving her space. For several minutes, only the ticking of the old wall clock filled the room. Rosa's eyes moved slowly over Mateo's handwriting, her lips pressed together, and once she touched her chest, as if steadying her heart. When she finally looked up, her face was flushed with emotion, and her voice barely rose above a whisper. He remembers her, even if he didn't know her well. He says he's forgiven the silence, that he understands the pain she carried and the choice she made. Keanu nodded, his own throat tightening. He said meeting me helped connect the pieces. Rosa folded the letter and placed it back in the envelope, holding it as if it were something sacred. She never got to see her son grow up, she said. But maybe this is her way of bringing the two of you together. Her boys. Keanu blinked, surprised. Her boys? Rosa smiled through tears. Don't you see? She gave Mateo life, and she gave you light. You may not be brothers by blood, but you are brothers by Lucia's love. Keanu didn't speak for a long moment. The weight of those words, their quiet truth, settled into his chest like something that had always been there, waiting to be named. I never really knew what a mother's love felt like, he said. Not in the traditional way, but Lucia, she made me feel safe. She made me believe I mattered. Rosa reached across the table and took his hand. She'd be so proud to see the man you became. She always knew you'd do something special, not just on a screen, but with your heart. Outside, the wind stirred the branches again, and a soft chime echoed from the porch. Rosa stood slowly and walked to a small cabinet near the kitchen wall. She opened a drawer and returned with something wrapped in linen. She set it gently on the table and unwrapped it. A small ceramic dish, painted by hand, with faded blue flowers and a tiny inscription on the back. Lucia's initials. She made this for you, told me to keep it until the time was right. Keanu's hand hovered over the dish, then picked it up as if holding a piece of his own history. The initials blurred through his tears. Keanu turned the ceramic dish in his hands, cradling it with the same gentleness one might give to a memory. The edges were chipped slightly, worn down by years, but the paint still held traces of the care that had gone into it. He imagined Lucia at Rosa's table, painting by candlelight after putting him to bed. Alone, but full of love. "I don't remember this," he whispered. "You wouldn't," Rosa said softly. "You were barely 5 when she made it. She said it was for your first apartment one day, something of hers, close to your keys. She wanted you to know she believed you'd make a home." The word home landed like a stone in his chest. Lucia had never owned a house, never had the luxury of comfort or permanence. But she had made a home in every room she touched, with every story she told, every lullaby she hummed beside a bed not her own. Keanu reached for a small slip of paper from his coat pocket. "I wrote this for Mateo. I'd like you to read it too." Rosa opened it with care. It read, "She was more than my caretaker. She was my compass. When my life split into pieces, she stitched light into every corner of my heart. I never said thank you properly. I hope, in these moments between you and I finally have." Rosa pressed the note to her lips, then hugged it close to her chest. She knew, Keanu. Even if you didn't say it, she knew. They sat in silence again. Outside, the clouds had parted, and late sunlight filtered through the window. Dust motes swirled in the beams, dancing like ghosts from another lifetime. Keanu stood and slipped the ceramic dish gently into his bag. Then he leaned forward and embraced Rosa. Not a polite goodbye, but the kind that says, "We shared something eternal." When he reached the front porch, Rosa called after him. "The last thing," she said. "When Lucius first came here, scared, uncertain, and carrying so much on her shoulders, she told me one thing that stayed with me all these years." Keanu turned back, eyebrows raised. She said, "I don't know if I can save him, but I can hold the light until he finds his way." His eyes burned with tears again, but he smiled. She did. Every day. As he stepped off the porch and into the cooling air, he looked back one last time at the house that had given him one more piece of the woman who shaped his soul. Then, in the hush of dusk, Keanu Reeves walked down the gravel path. No cameras, no audience, just a man, carrying a dish, a story, and the love of a woman who gave him everything, silently. And it was more than enough. The idea came to Keanu late one night during a walk under the moonlight outside his home in the Hollywood Hills. He just returned from Stratford, from Rosa's tearful embrace, from hearing her whisper that Lucia would be proud of him. The words echoed like wind chimes in his chest, soft, delicate, and lingering. Lucia's letter had changed him. Mateo's face had changed him. Rosa's shaking hands clutching the cedar box had changed him. But none of it was loud or dramatic. It was all quiet healing. And somehow, he wanted to honor that silence with something permanent, something simple, something that could rest close to the heart. The next morning, Keanu called a trusted artisan he'd worked with before, someone who understood emotional significance and cultural respect. He described what he wanted: a necklace, hand-beaded, featuring cedar beads for protection, turquoise for strength, and one smooth central stone, like an anchor, like a soul. He even sent the artisan a photo, one of Lucia's old drawings Rosa had found folded in the cedar box. It was crude and faint, done in blue pencil, but unmistakably hers. It featured a small child standing beneath a tree, arms outstretched, a necklace swinging from their hand like a lasso of love. Keanu asked for 3 necklaces, one for Rosa, one for Mateo, and one for himself. It took 3 weeks to finish. During that time, Keanu kept busy but never stopped thinking of Lucia. He reread her letter often. He caught himself humming one of her lullabies while waiting for coffee, and late at night, he found himself tracing the outline of her handwriting on the envelope, wondering how such a small thing, a name in cursive, a folded paper, could open such a wide door to the past. When the package finally arrived, Keanu opened it slowly, reverently. Each necklace was placed in its own cloth pouch, stitched with thread the color of Lucia's favorite shawl. The cedar beads were smooth and light, emitting a faint scent of warmth and age. The turquoise stones gleamed like captured sky. In the center of each necklace sat a single, polished wooden bead, hand-carved with a symbol. An open hand holding a heart. Keanu's breath caught when he saw it. It was everything he'd imagined and more. He held one of the necklaces to his chest and whispered, "This is for you, Lucia." But he wasn't finished yet. There were still deliveries to make. Still two people whose lives had been shaped by the same quiet force of love. Keanu boarded a quiet flight to Stratford the next morning, carrying the 2 extra pouches in a small wooden box. He didn't alert the press, didn't make arrangements in advance. This wasn't something to announce. It was something to deliver, personally, silently, and with all the reverence it deserved. When Rosa opened her door and saw him standing there again, she blinked back tears immediately. Her hands flew to her mouth. "I didn't expect you so soon," she whispered. Keanu smiled gently and stepped forward. "I have something Lucia left behind." He didn't elaborate. He just placed the box on her kitchen table and opened the lid. Rosa's hands trembled as she reached for the necklace inside. The cedar beads made her gasp softly. The turquoise caught the sunlight through the window and scattered it across her weathered table. She drew this," Rosa said, eyes locked on the central beads carved emblem. "I remember this sketch. She said it was what love looked like, when you didn't know how to say it." Keanu nodded. She did say it. Every day. In the way she lived. Rosa clutched the necklace to her chest and closed her eyes. For a moment the room was completely still. Then she looked up. "Will you take a picture?" she asked shyly. "I want Mateo to see it." Keanu did one better. He reached into the box and pulled out the second necklace, the twin. "This one's for him." Rosa reached out and touched the beads with such tenderness, as if touching a bridge between 2 halves of a story never told. "I never thought they'd meet," she said quietly. "Not in person, but this is better than I ever dreamed." Later that day, Keanu sent Mateo a message. It simply read, "She left something for you too. It's ready." Mateo replied within minutes, "I'll come, wherever it is." The next day, Keanu returned to Los Angeles. He met Mateo at a small park just outside the city, under a spreading pepper tree that reminded them both of the stories Lucia used to tell, of birds nesting in peaceful branches, of mothers waiting at dusk. Mateo walked slowly toward him, hands in his jacket. When Keanu held out the necklace, Mateo didn't reach for it right away. He stared at it, long and full of emotion. "She made this?" Mateo asked softly. "She inspired it," Keanu said. "She lived it." Mateo finally took the pouch, holding it close. "She would have worn this every day." "No," Keanu said, with a small smile. "She already did." They sat in silence beneath the tree, 2 sons of the same woman, brought together by love not written in blood, but carved in time. And for the first time, neither of them felt alone. That evening, Keanu returned home and placed the final necklace, the third and final piece, onto his desk. He didn't rush to wear it. He just stared at it for a long while. The colors reminded him of the morning sun hitting snow on Toronto sidewalks, of Lucia humming softly in the kitchen, of a woman whose presence stitched peace into his chaotic childhood without ever asking for recognition. He picked it up and ran his thumb across the cedar. It smelled faintly of memory, of carved wood toys, of Lucia's hand lotion, of something both ordinary and sacred. The next morning, he slipped the necklace over his head before leaving the house. That day, while walking along the coast with his dog, someone approached him, a young woman, maybe 25. She didn't ask for a photo, she just said, "That's beautiful. Is it special?" Keanu looked down at the necklace. "Yes," he said, after a pause. "It's a gift from someone who raised me." He didn't offer more. Didn't need to. Some stories aren't meant for headlines. Some stories are carried in the weight of cedar beads pressed gently against your heart. Back in Stratford, Rosa wore her necklace to church the following Sunday. When people asked where it came from, she simply said, "From a friend of Lucia's." In Mexico, Mateo hung his necklace above his bed, beside the photo of Lucia holding toddler Keanu in the garden. Every night, before sleep, he'd glance at it, not to mourn what was lost, but to remember what was rediscovered. And Keanu, well, he wore his in quiet moments, when walking, when journaling, when pausing at a red light and catching the glint of turquoise in the rearview mirror. It was a reminder that some of the most important people in your life don't leave behind buildings or awards or last names. They leave behind the feeling of being seen, of being safe, of being loved, without explanation. Months later, Keanu quietly commissioned a limited number of replicas, donating them anonymously to a foundation supporting immigrant caregivers. Each one came in a small box with a note that simply read, "For the ones who gave everything and asked for nothing." No signature, no press release, just a legacy, passed hand to hand. In the quiet folds of 3 necklaces, a woman's life lived on, not through fame but through love, not through grand gestures but through the boys she raised, one by blood, one by heart, who now walked the world carrying her memory close to theirs. And in that, Lucia Alvarez finally received the honor she never asked for, but always deserved. The city of Los Angeles was still draped in pre-dawn haze when Keanu stepped out of the airport terminal. He wore no sunglasses, no entourage followed him, just a simple leather backpack slung over one shoulder and a small cedar box wrapped in a towel inside. The early morning chill clung to his jacket, but he didn't seem to notice. His mind was still in Stratford, still by the lake, still hearing Lucia's voice in his head. Back home, he didn't unpack right away. He left the suitcase by the door and sat at his kitchen table, fingers tracing the edge of Lucia's original letter. It had traveled across decades and continents to find him. And now, it wouldn't just live in a drawer, it needed to become something more. He spent the next few days in quiet reflection, canceled a few meetings, walked the dog more than usual. Each morning, he reread the letter, especially the line she had opened with, the one that hit him the hardest. "You were my little sunshine." It wasn't just a memory anymore, it was a mission. He reached out to a few trusted friends in the nonprofit world, people who worked closely with immigrant communities, with domestic workers, with those whose names often go unspoken in history. He didn't want a charity gala or a press release. He didn't even want his name attached to it. "I want to do something for her," he told them. "For people like her, quiet heroes." And so, in a rented office space in a modest West Hollywood building, just 4 rooms, no flashy signage, they began drafting the foundation charter. Keanu sat with lawyers and social workers over cups of black tea, discussing grant structures, outreach programs, and how to find the ones who were most often forgotten. They called it the Lucia Alvarez Foundation. The mission was deeply personal, to provide emergency grants, wellness support, and legal advocacy for nannies and caregivers, especially immigrant women who had sacrificed everything to nurture other people's children. Some had crossed borders, lost their own families, endured abuse, or simply faded into anonymity. Keanu wanted them to be seen. Every welcome letter, every grant application, every resource packet began the same way, with the very words that once comforted a little boy staring out a window while his world came undone. "You were my little sunshine." Lucia's legacy would no longer be sealed in a letter. It would live in meals delivered, shelters supported, court hearings won, and the quiet dignity of women finally being told, "You matter." And it was only just beginning. A few weeks later, Keanu received a small package at the foundation's mailbox. No return address, just his name carefully written in Spanish script. Inside was a simple, hand-carved wooden box. The craftsmanship was precise, the surface sanded smooth, the hinges quiet and deliberate. On the inside of the lid, carved in delicate, uneven letters, was a single phrase: "Gracias, Mama." There was no signature, but Keanu didn't need one. He knew. Mateo had found a way to say what his mother never could. Keanu placed the box on a small shelf in the front office. Not in his own space, but in the community room where the staff held orientation meetings for new grant recipients. Next to it, he framed a copy of Lucia's original letter, her handwriting preserved beneath glass. Her words sat beside stacks of welcome kits and resource guides. Some of the visitors who came to the foundation spoke no English. Others were teenagers seeking help on behalf of their mothers or grandmothers. One elderly woman wept openly as she read the words aloud in Spanish, then whispered, "Someone remembered us." Keanu didn't linger in the office much. He wasn't there for applause or attention. He'd quietly drop by early in the morning or after hours, sometimes placing flowers in a vase near Lucia's photo or leaving a tray of warm pastries for the team. His presence was felt, but never loud. The foundation began gaining quiet traction across California. Word spread through trusted community leaders. Social workers began referring women who had slipped through bureaucratic cracks. The applications poured in, each one a story of resilience and silent sacrifice. Keanu read every single one, even if it took him into the early hours of the morning. He would underline names, highlight notes, attach sticky tabs with simple reminders. Follow-up: lost her home while raising 3 kids for another family, taught herself English from library books. And sometimes he would stop and breathe, overwhelmed by the weight of it all. But never once did he question it. This wasn't charity. This was family. An extension of the love Lucia had planted in him. What began as one sealed letter tucked into a bookcase had grown into something far-reaching and deeply human. Lucia had lived quietly, but her echo was now being heard in places she never imagined. Not through fame, not through fortune, but through lives changed in the quiet corners of the world. The foundation grew slowly, like a tree taking root in hard soil. Keanu kept it deliberately small, focused on personal impact rather than scale. No social media, no celebrity endorsements, just handwritten letters, warm meals, and the quiet satisfaction of doing something meaningful. Months later, a package arrived at the office. No return address, just Keanu's name handwritten in careful block print. Inside was a small wooden box, its corners worn smooth by years of use. When he opened it, his breath caught. The box was hand-carved, polished, and sanded by patient hands. On the inside lid was a single inscription, burned into the wood in Spanish: "Gracias, Mama." He didn't need a signature. He knew it was from Mateo. There were no grand gestures between them, just occasional updates, a photo now and then, a call on birthdays. But they stayed in touch. 2 men raised by the same quiet woman, connected more by memory than by time. Keanu placed the box beside Lucia's original letter in his private studio. No one else needed to see it. It wasn't for display. It was for remembrance. One evening, after everyone had left the office, Keanu walked into the modest welcome area, lit only by the soft glow of a single desk lamp. A young intern was tidying up and asked casually, "Mr. Reeves, what made you want to start this foundation?" Keanu paused, then smiled. "She gave me everything," he said, "and asked for nothing." He picked up a copy of the welcome packet and held it for a long time, reading the first line once more. "You were my little sunshine." Then he turned off the light and stepped out into the night, knowing somewhere, someone was reading those words for the first time, and feeling, maybe for the first time, truly seen. The sky over Toronto was a muted gray when Keanu returned. It had been nearly a year since he first opened Lucia's letter, yet the journey she sent him on had changed his soul in ways he hadn't expected. He had seen landscapes of memory, stitched together with love, sacrifice, and silence. He had met a brother he never knew he had, comforted a woman who had given her whole life in quiet service, and uncovered the full story of someone who had always been more than just a nanny. Now he had one last stop. The cemetery sat at the edge of town, tucked behind a church long forgotten by most. It wasn't grand. There were no gates with gilded names, no statues towering above, just rows of simple stones, flanked by willows and soft moss, with a gravel path that crunched beneath Keanu's boots. He carried no entourage, no assistants, no cameras, just a folded piece of paper in one hand and a single white lily in the other. He found her grave under a tree, unmarked for years, until Rosa had finally managed to have a headstone placed. It was modest, granite, gently worn. It read, Lucia Alvarez, 194219992. She gave quietly, she loved deeply. Keanu stood there in silence. No words came at first. The wind moved the leaves overhead, and somewhere nearby a bird sang a low, lilting tune. He bent down and brushed away a few leaves that had fallen across the stone. Then, without fanfare, he reached into the inside pocket of his coat and pulled out a small frame. Inside it was the drawing he'd made as a child, stick figures of him and Lucia, holding hands in a garden. She had kept it all those years. It was worn now, the crayon faded at the edges, but it had been the one she loved enough to save in that cedar chest, the one that said everything neither of them had ever spoken. He placed it gently beside the headstone, then added the white lily. I didn't know how much you gave, he whispered. I didn't know how much of you lived in the quiet things. He crouched there for a long time, one hand on the stone, the other braced against his knee. And then, his voice barely audible in the hush of the morning, he added, You gave everything, and I never got to say thank you. But now I do. He stayed like that as the breeze moved through the tree above, brushing past him like a blessing. Keanu walked through the modest downtown Los Angeles office he'd quietly leased, now humming with the early life of something meaningful. The Lucia Alvarez Foundation had no flashy signage, no grand press announcement, just a simple plaque inside that read, For the women who shaped us silently. The small team working there knew little of Keanu's personal connection. That was how he wanted it. Their mission was clear: provide grants, training, and emergency support to nannies, caretakers, and domestic workers across the country, those who loved and labored behind closed doors and rarely received thanks. Every new grant application was printed with the same line across the top. You were my little sunshine, a sentence lifted from Lucia's letter that had changed everything. One afternoon, as Keanu visited the office quietly, avoiding any attention, the receptionist handed him a small wooden box. No return address, no label, just his name, hand-carved into the lid. Inside was a piece of cedar, smoothed by hand, warm to the touch. Attached to it was a note, written in elegant Spanish. Gracias, Mama, for giving me a brother. Mateo. Keanu closed the box and rested his hand over it for a long time. The air in the room thickened, not with grief, but with something deeper. Continuity. Grace. A full circle, quiet and complete. Lucia had raised them both, in different countries with different circumstances, but the love she left behind reached further than she'd ever imagined. Not just across miles, not just across years, but into the lives of other caretakers who would now have a chance at dignity because of her legacy. Keanu placed the box on a shelf by the window where the sun touched it each morning. It sat beside a framed photo of Lucia holding him as a child and a small replica of the necklace he now wore often, tucked beneath his shirt. He didn't need headlines. He didn't need applause. What he had now was better. Quiet ripples, born of one woman's sacrifice and carried forward by love. He turned toward the window and whispered, Gracias. And for the first time in a long time, he felt like someone's sunshine again. The California sun was beginning its slow descent behind the hills when Keanu stood at the gates of the Lucia Alvarez Foundation. Today was not like other days. The quiet hum of the office carried an undercurrent of anticipation. Staff moved about purposefully, setting out extra chairs, preparing refreshments, adjusting small placards at each table. A private gathering had been planned, something intimate, a dinner to honor the quiet caretakers who had made lives better behind the scenes. And among the guests, flying in from a small village outside Guadalajara, was Mateo Alvarez. Keanu stood outside for a moment longer, hands in his pockets, his posture calm but reflective. The moment felt heavier than he expected, not solemn but sacred. Mateo was due any minute, and Keanu had insisted on meeting him personally at the curb. No red carpet, no photographers, just two men, joined not by blood, but by a woman's love. A taxi approached, and Keanu watched as Mateo stepped out, wearing a pressed white shirt, navy slacks, and holding a wooden box under one arm. His hair had more gray than Keanu remembered, and his expression was a blend of nerves and wonder. They didn't speak right away. Mateo looked around at the building, the modest sign above the door, and then at Keanu. Their eyes locked, and something unspoken passed between them. Acknowledgement, warmth, even a flicker of pride. Keanu reached out, and Mateo took his hand with a firm, calloused grip. "You came," Keanu said softly. Mateo nodded. "I wouldn't miss this." They walked side by side through the glass doors. Inside, the staff welcomed them with quiet respect. No one crowded them, no one asked for autographs. This wasn't about fame. It was about honoring the unseen. The gathering took place in the sunlit courtyard behind the foundation. A long wooden table had been set beneath string lights and a flowering jacaranda tree. Seated around it were women and men who had spent their lives in service to others. Nannies, housekeepers, caretakers, companions. Each had a story. Each had given love in silence. And tonight, they were being honored not with trophies, but with presence, with recognition, with dignity. Keanu introduced Mateo gently, calling him family. The guests didn't ask how, they simply smiled and nodded. The bond between the two men was evident, etched in the way they moved, in the way they listened to each other. Mateo sat down beside Keanu, placing the wooden box on the table. "I made something," he said quietly. "For the foundation. For her." Keanu rested a hand on it, not opening it yet. "We'll share it together, when the time's right." The soft murmur of conversation filled the air, joined by the clink of cutlery and the occasional burst of laughter. Mateo looked around at the people, at the twinkling lights, at the picture of Lucia placed near the head of the table. He whispered, "She'd never believe this." Keanu looked at him. She believed in all of us, even when we didn't. As the evening unfolded, the soft California dusk wrapped the courtyard in warm shadows. Mateo leaned back slightly in his chair, watching as the guests shared quiet stories, some in English, others in Spanish, a few through translators. The energy wasn't loud or showy. It was humble, real, a celebration stitched together with gratitude and memory. One older woman told of walking miles each morning to a house in Beverly Hills, where she raised a boy who called her Nana and cried when she left. A younger man, recently laid off, choked up thanking the foundation for covering his rent during a medical emergency. None of them knew Lucia personally, but all of them had lived versions of her story, giving, sacrificing, often overlooked. Keanu listened intently to each speaker, nodding, occasionally smiling, occasionally pressing a hand to his heart when something hit close. Mateo noticed how still he sat, how present he was. There was no performance in Keanu's gaze, just reverence. These people reminded him of Lucia, of her resilience, of her quiet bravery. After dinner, Keanu rose to speak. The group hushed naturally, all eyes turning to him. "I just want to say one thing," he began. His voice was calm, almost whisper soft, but the courtyard fell into perfect silence. "We often think that the people who change the world are the ones with power or money or titles. But the people who shaped me, they had none of those things." He paused, glancing at the photo of Lucia, His voice thickened just slightly. They had love, patience, a quiet kind of strength, the kind that doesn't shout but lasts, the kind you don't always notice until you feel it missing. Keanu looked out across the group, his eyes lingering on each face. This foundation was born not just from memory, but from responsibility, to honor those whose hands held us steady, to give back some of what they gave us. Then he raised his glass, motioning for Mateo to stand beside him. "This is my brother," Keanu said, "and we're both here because of one woman. She raised me, she gave birth to him, and she lives on, in this work, in these people, in us." The toast rose with quiet power. To the ones who raised us, not with noise, but with grace. Everyone lifted their glasses. Some wiped their eyes. Mateo stood tall beside Keanu, visibly moved. He hadn't planned to speak, but something stirred in him. He cleared his throat and held the wooden box close to his chest. "I didn't grow up with her," he began, his accent thick but his voice clear. "But tonight, it feels like I did. Because I see her in you all. In your stories, in your strength." He opened the box slowly. Inside was a hand-carved plaque made from cedar, the same wood Lucia had used in her keepsake chest. Burned into it was a quote, in both English and Spanish. "She gave without asking, she loved without fear, and she never asked to be remembered." Mateo placed it on the table. "But we will remember her, all of you, our proof." As the evening drew to a close, the courtyard glowed under a canopy of string lights. Conversations softened, laughter turned reflective, and people began embracing each other with a kind of warmth only shared between those who've lived parallel lives. Keanu stood beside Mateo, watching as one of the caregivers gently traced her fingers over the words on the plaque Mateo had made. She didn't speak. She didn't need to. Her expression said everything. Later, Keanu and Mateo walked through the foundation's quiet hallways. The office was dim now, the hum of daytime work long faded. In the lobby, they paused by the framed photo of Lucia. Keanu stepped closer and whispered, "She gave us both something we didn't even know we needed." Mateo nodded, his voice low. "A chance to carry her forward." Before parting, they sat side by side on a bench beneath the jacaranda tree. No grand speeches, no plans, just the silence of shared understanding. "Will you come back?" Keanu asked. Mateo looked out at the fading stars. "Yes, not as a guest, as family." Keanu smiled. That's what she would have wanted. They stood, embraced once more, and parted ways beneath the California sky. Two men connected by a woman who had quietly shaped them both, and who, in her own way, had brought them home. The quiet after Mateo's visit lingered in Keanu's mind like the soft ringing of a bell long after it was struck. He returned to his home in the Hollywood Hills, carrying with him not just memories, but something more pressing, a responsibility he couldn't ignore. The foundation was growing. Support letters were coming in from all over. Caregivers from Texas to Vermont were applying for aid, for training, for recognition. But one idea echoed louder than the rest, a feeling he hadn't been able to shake. Lucia's legacy couldn't live only in letters and photographs hidden in drawers. It deserved to be seen, felt, understood. So Keanu began to build something different. Not a statue, not a memorial, something intimate, something human. He called it the Legacy Box. In a quiet back room of the Foundation's office, Keanu began assembling its contents with painstaking care. He brought in Lucia's original letter, the one she'd written him in 1981. He had it preserved in museum-grade glass, the ink faded but still legible, her handwriting soft and sweeping across the page. Beside it, he placed the photo of her holding toddler Keanu in the garden. The image had been gently enhanced for clarity, but no detail was altered. Her eyes filled with joy. Keanu's toddler grin, reaching for her necklace. It told a story no words ever could. He added the original drawing, the stick figure sketch he'd made as a child, crayon still barely visible, the word sunshine scribbled in his clumsy handwriting at the bottom. It had survived all these years, and now it would speak louder than ever. The centerpiece, however, was a video. He had traveled back to Stratford one last time, sitting with Rosa under the same willow tree where they first opened the cedar chest. With a quiet camera crew and only one microphone, Keanu gently interviewed her. No rehearsed lines, no script, just memory and heart. Rosa spoke of Lucia's decision to leave Mateo with family in Mexico, how she carried that pain into every lullaby she sang for Keanu, how she wrote letters she never mailed, how she prayed over a cedar box as if it held the weight of her soul. She didn't think anyone would ever know what she gave, Rosa said in the video. But now they will. Now they do. Keanu watched the footage again and again before approving it. There was no need to polish it. The truth in Rosa's trembling voice was perfect as it was. He placed the video inside a tablet embedded in the legacy box. When opened, the screen came alive. Visitors could sit on a small bench, press a button, and listen to Lucia's story, told through the eyes of the woman who knew her best. The legacy box was small enough to travel, but large enough to house meaning. Keanu designed it to be the first piece in a traveling exhibit called Hands That Held Us, a quiet tribute to nannies, caregivers, and domestic workers whose names rarely made the papers, but whose influence shaped generations. And in paper, he refused to be the face of it. Instead, every location it visited would host local voices, real stories of real people. A single sentence opened the exhibit, etched in brass beneath Lucia's letter. To those who gave quietly and loved deeply. The first showing took place at a small cultural center in Santa Fe. No press, no advertising, just word of mouth and a poster on the community bulletin board. The room filled slowly, mostly with older women and young mothers pushing strollers. A few curious students wandered in, then stayed longer than they meant to. They read Lucia's letter. They listened to Rosa's voice. They stared at the photo of Keanu as a child, held gently in Lucia's arms. And they wrote. Beside the exhibit, Keanu had left a small table with blank note cards and a wooden box labeled Memories and Reflections. By the end of the first week, it was overflowing. She reminded me of my grandmother who raised me. My mom was a housekeeper for 30 years. I never thanked her properly. I will now. He saved a life without even knowing it. Keanu visited Santa Fe quietly, slipping in through the back entrance. He wore a baseball cap and simple jeans. No one recognized him. That's how he preferred it. He sat on the bench in front of the exhibit, listening to Rosa's video, watching a mother explain the photos to her daughter in hushed tones. That's the woman who raised a boy like her own, the mother said softly, not because she had to, but because she chose to. Keanu swallowed the emotion rising in his throat. He turned and read some of the note cards. One simply read, "You were my little sunshine." He closed his eyes. It was enough. The exhibit moved next to Minneapolis, then Savannah, then Boise. In each city, it drew people not because of any celebrity connection, but because it tapped into something sacred: memory, gratitude, love that wasn't transactional but transformative. At one event in Portland, an elderly black woman in her 70s approached the exhibit and stared at the photo of Lucia for a long time. She leaned over and whispered, "I know that look. I gave it too." Then she sat down and wrote a note. "I raised 5 children that weren't mine. This is the first time I've ever felt seen." The staff mailed the note to the foundation. Keanu had it framed and placed next to the legacy box permanently. Over time, the exhibit grew. Other families began donating items, letters from their own nannies, keepsakes, photos, small mementos. Keanu made sure each item was treated with reverence. The exhibit wasn't about scale, it was about soul. He also created an online portal where caregivers could record voice messages sharing their stories. These recordings were later played at the exhibits through soft speakers hidden inside wooden sculptures carved by Mateo. One recording came from a man in El Paso who said, "I was a cook for a wealthy family for 20 years. They never learned my name. But the daughter, she hugged me every day. That's what I remember. That's what mattered." Keanu listened to every submission himself before it was added. Some made him laugh. Some wrecked him completely. One evening, he received a message from a woman in Detroit who had once cleaned hotel rooms while raising 2 children alone. Her voice cracked as she said, "No one ever told me I mattered. But this feels like a thank you I never thought would come." Keanu sat in the dark that night, listening again and again. He whispered, "You mattered." Everywhere the legacy box went, it left behind more than notes. It left healing. It left permission. Permission to grieve the unseen sacrifices. Permission to celebrate the quiet triumphs. And perhaps most importantly, permission to remember that love doesn't need a stage to change the world. In time, the legacy box was invited to Washington, D.C. for a limited exhibit in the Smithsonian's Museum of American History. The request came with an offer for Keanu to attend a press event and speak. He declined the spotlight. Instead, Rosa attended on behalf of the foundation, standing beneath a banner that simply read, "Lucia Alvarez, one life, many legacies." She stood with quiet dignity, her voice still strong despite her years, and when asked why she thought Lucia's story mattered so much, she smiled and said, "Because she gave everything and asked for nothing, and now the world gets to say thank you." Keanu watched the live stream from his living room, tears in his eyes. He didn't need to be there. The world had finally met Lucia, and they loved her. The hills above Malibu were quiet that morning, softened by a low mist drifting in from the ocean. Keanu sat beneath a tall sycamore tree, its bark smooth and pale, its branches arcing over him like shelter. The sun was just beginning to rise, casting golden streaks through the haze. He wore a simple black t-shirt, jeans, and the necklace, a replica of the one he'd made as a child, resting just beneath his collar. In his hands was the letter, Lucia's letter, the same one he had opened so many months ago in a hotel room in Toronto. The paper was worn now, creased from repeated reading, its ink familiar like an old lullaby. He didn't need to read it again. He had memorized every word. Still, he unfolded it gently, as if touching something sacred. He let his eyes drift over the first line, "My little sunshine." The breeze picked up, rustling the leaves overhead. It was the kind of day Lucia would have loved. Peaceful, full of light, but not loud. Keanu leaned back against the trunk of the tree and breathed it all in. So much had happened since the letter found him. He had uncovered a part of his past he didn't know was missing, met a brother he never knew he had, reconnected with memories buried in childhood, cradled in lullabies and whispered prayers. He had come face to face with the woman who shaped him, not with power, but with presence. She hadn't had much, no fortune, no titles, just a heart that kept giving even when it was broken. Keanu looked out across the landscape, eyes landing on the hills that seemed to stretch forever. Then, in the soft cadence of thought, came the words he had spoken quietly to himself many times before. She gave me love when love was scarce. She gave me strength when I didn't know I had any. And now, she gives me purpose. He sat in stillness for a long while, holding the letter close to his chest. It felt warm despite the morning chill, as if it still carried the heat of Lucia's hands. Behind him, just out of frame, sat a small wooden box. It was a new one, crafted by Mateo, sent a few weeks ago. Inside were voice recordings sent in from across the country, stories of caretakers, of grandmothers and aunts, of immigrant workers who fed, dressed, and rocked children to sleep while their own families waited far away. Keanu had listened to every one. He pressed play on a tiny speaker and a new voice began. It was a young woman from Mississippi. Her voice cracked as she spoke. "I was raised by a woman named Sarita. She came from El Salvador. I don't remember the toys I had growing up, but I remember her voice when she sang to me. I remember the smell of her cooking. I remember that she always showed up even when she was tired, and I never said thank you. Until now. Keanu closed his eyes. He could picture Lucia there beside him, nodding. She would have understood. She always did. He picked up his phone and opened the gallery of photos. One of them showed Rosa, laughing mid-sentence during her video interview. Another was of Mateo and Keanu standing side by side at the foundation dinner, holding the wooden plaque between them. There were shots of the traveling exhibit, handwritten cards from strangers, faces of women he'd never met but somehow already knew. Each image told a story not just of what had been lost, but what had been remembered, and what had been rebuilt. Lucia never asked to be remembered. She never asked for gratitude or recognition. She simply gave, and in doing so, planted something deeper than legacy. She planted purpose. Keanu stood slowly, brushing the dust from his jeans. He walked a few steps toward the overlook where the coastline met the sky. Then he turned to the camera, calm and grounded. His eyes were clear, his voice steady. "This story wasn't about me," he said softly. "It was about someone who gave when she had nothing, who chose love over comfort, who taught me that the quietest people often carry the loudest truths." He paused, the breeze lifting the corner of the letter still folded in his hand. "There are Lucias everywhere," he continued. "People who hold families together behind the scenes, people whose names are rarely mentioned, but whose love writes the real story." He stepped closer, the camera tightening slightly. "Maybe it was your grandmother. Maybe it was your neighbor. Maybe it was you." A long breath, a silence that felt full. "If this story moved you," he said gently, "like, share, and subscribe, because someone out there might be waiting to feel remembered." He offered a small nod. Not dramatic, not rehearsed, just honest. The frame held for a beat longer as he looked out toward the sky. Then, slowly, he turned back toward the tree, folded the letter once more, and placed it carefully into the pocket over his heart. The breeze continued, and somewhere in the hush of the hills, a legacy lived on.